Lifelong Republican and State Representative Phelps Anderson is still one of those things, but after voting to repeal an unenforceable law that criminalizes abortion procedures, Anderson's Republican colleagues and Republican constituents seem to think it was time for him to leave. Mr. Anderson won't resign, but he's changed his voter registration and is now the House's only independent. He won't caucus with Republicans. The law could only be enforced if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade in some way, but reproductive rights advocates say that's a real possibility with the latest iteration of the Supreme Court. And Inez, Mr. Anderson has been quiet about his decision to vote to repeal the law. And a reminder, he changed his vote from the last time this bill was in front of him. What do you think? What do you make of this dust up?
I just wish he would tell us why.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he realized that now it is likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned given the Supreme Court. So because it was real, he changed his vote, or whether he met a voter or maybe someone in his family who said, here's why women need to have choices over their own reproductive systems. And I would just love to hear from him. I remember when I was young that there were pro-abortion choice Republicans and anti-abortion choice Democrats,
Right.
and both parties seemed to have room for a little dissension on the edges, even if they did have a party platform that said we're against abortion or we're for abortion. And I think that big tents can be tricky, but when there's room for differing views, sometimes you come up with better policy. And I'm sorry that really both parties are so limiting to what you can believe or not believe. I mean, Phelps Anderson isn't going to vote for Democratic economic initiatives. He's probably not going to be a big, voice against pro-gun things. So he would be a solid Republican vote, except maybe this one time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think parties might want to be more welcoming to different viewpoints sometimes.
Merritt, pick up on that. Is there an opportunity here, or is there something for the Republican Party here in New Mexico to think about?
Well, certainly, I think they do have a vote on key issues. Of course, the Republican minority in the New Mexico House is pretty. It's pretty marked.
Mm-hmm.
They have fewer seats, almost now more than ever. So. There's really not a lot of impact unless they build coalitions across the aisle to defeat specific bills.
Does the party in some way gain in this situation?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. And I don't blame Representative Anderson for keeping his counsel. I think it's pretty clear. I'm not an insider to the state Republican Party or the caucus. You can assume perhaps he felt some pressure. He voted as he did. He has changed his affiliation. Andy Nunez had done this in the past. Right. We have had incidents in the past. And, I just want to point out, I am going to disagree with Inez. I don't think that this bill, for the second time it's been brought up, I don't think this changes the state of abortion in New Mexico. I think this is political maneuvering. I think it's a political grenade thrown. I think certainly the Republicans have a decades-long history of weaponizing abortion. I think the Democrats have picked up on it. I think they're weaponizing it this time to weed out moderates or conservative Democrats. I think it doesn't do much. It did nothing in a 30-day session except make people mad. I think it's making people mad in this session. But I don't think this bill, whether it passes or fails, is going to change access to abortion in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Laura, I got maybe it seems like an obvious question here, but don't Democrats do the same thing here? Isn't there a litmus test of a sorts with Democrats? I mean, even this particular bill has been a litmus test for Democrats in their level of progressiveness, so to speak. Is this the same thing, just other side of the coin?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely do that as Democrats. And I think that we see across the state, if you look at the last election and those who were challenged in the primary and then lost their seat, and a couple which flipped then to Republican, we're seeing the same sort of thing where there's more of a polarization, there's more of a push to become, I think, on the one hand, and the Republicans to be more conservative. Of course, the influence of Trump and that happening across the country will have that effect. But you see the same thing on the Democrat side. You see this progressive push where groups from the metro areas that might be more progressive in terms of the voters going into rural areas and attacking incumbent Democrats like John Arthur Smith. And I know that district in particular because it's my home district, but John Arthur Smith was a conservative Democrat. He had done a lot in terms of fiscal responsibility, was beloved in that community. And then when he was taken out by a more progressive Democrat, it flipped Republican. And I would be surprised if it ever flips back, to be honest, because there's just different flavors of Republican and Democrat across the state. And I think that, to Merritt's point, we do need to figure out a way to be more welcoming in general, or was it Inez? I can't remember who said it, but we need to be more welcoming in both parties. Otherwise, we're going to end up with this polarized and everybody's going to sort of just follow suit or be expected to, or else you're out. And the reality is we have to figure out how those representatives and senators reflect their district and not necessarily some agenda that's imposed upon them. So that's something that just, I think is really important for New Mexico, given that urban versus rural split. And that I think is more of a concern for me, is rural versus urban and how polarized those issues become.
Good points there. Inez, Laura makes an interesting point. The seat is fairly safe when you think about it. It represents portions of Chavez, Lee, and Roosevelt counties. And Mr. Anderson, he first got in 2018, his 2-year term. He was in the House from 77 through 80. Is there a danger of this seat going one way or the other? Does this upset anything particularly?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's going to be a Republican seat no matter who holds it. Mm-hmm. And what I prefer is that voters punish you if you stray too far, because part of it is polarization, but part of it is also being able to keep your promises. So if the governor runs in 2018 saying, I will get rid of this abortion ban, which will change how abortions can be delivered if the Supreme Court rules against Roe v. Wade. Merritt is absolutely right. If there's no change right now, this is getting ready for what is likely to happen. Because should Roe v. Wade be struck down by the Supreme Court, there's a decent chance that in New Mexico, abortion wouldn't be able to happen the way it would, and that it would criminalize doctors. So if you're saying as a party, this is our platform, but you have 6 or 7 Democrats in the Senate who are then saying, we're not going to let you get to that. I think, it's every bit the voters' right to say, then we're going to get Democrats who will vote for that. And it's the same with Mr. Anderson. If he wanted to run again, then his voters would go ahead and say, yes, we support you anyway, or we don't support you. But I think in general, it would be nice if there was a little more room for some differing viewpoints, not just on abortion. Think about early childhood.
Right.
And how some people were more fiscally concerned and other people were more concerned about delivering childhood. So you just have to consider how big a tent you're going to have.
Good point there. Merritt, I see you in agreement there. Pick up on that. It really is the voters who are going to decide this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think in particular, and that's why I see abortion in particular is weaponized. And I just want to note, the Supreme Court has been majority conservative for much longer than under the Trump presidency. And they never overturned Roe v. Wade. And in particular, the Supreme Court tends to it's not their practice to overturn an existing decision. So that's why I say I don't think it's likely. I just wanted to put that out. But it is up to the voters decide. And the impression I get looking at polls is the majority of Americans and the majority of New Mexicans want abortion to be legal. And then on the other side, there are some procedures that maybe New Mexicans and Americans aren't as comfortable with. And on the abortion debate, it's either all or nothing. Right. Clear, dramatic, and that's where people get polarized. And that's why I hate seeing an issue like this, and I keep saying get weaponized. And this is the bill in question is one sentence long. It's repealing an unenforceable law, and everybody's just lost their mind over it. And it makes me sad because to Laura's and Inez's point, there should be more room. for everybody to have an opinion on either side, and voters should also be able to have an opinion on either side and not be somehow ostracized for it.
Good place to end that segment. That was actually really well done.